The Supreme Court has just delivered a surprise ruling that has sent Donald Trump into a public meltdown on social media. The decision represents one of the most serious legal setbacks Trump has faced since leaving office. It came without warning. Rejected arguments his legal team has been pushing for months and directly weakens his broader strategy of avoiding accountability in multiple criminal cases. The ruling was released during the court's regular decision day, catching Trump's team completely off guard. They were expecting either a favorable outcome or, at minimum, more time before a decision was announced. Within minutes, Trump reacted angrily on Truth Social, attacking the justices who ruled against him, claiming political bias, and promising to fight what he called a miscarriage of justice. This decision dramatically reshapes Trump's legal outlook. It undermines core defenses he has relied on to delay proceedings and could accelerate the path toward trial, conviction, and even potential incarceration, developments that seemed unlikely just hours earlier. For years, Trump has placed enormous faith in the Supreme Court as his ultimate legal shield. During his presidency, he appointed 3 justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, creating a 6-3 conservative majority. Trump clearly believed this court would be sympathetic to his claims and willing to step in where lower courts refused. His legal strategy across multiple cases followed a consistent pattern: lose in trial courts, lose on appeal, and then rely on the Supreme Court to intervene. Trump repeatedly assured supporters that the justices understood presidential power and would block what he described as politically motivated prosecutions. His attorneys crafted arguments designed to appeal to conservative views on executive authority and separation of powers. They claimed former presidents have broad immunity, challenged the legality of the special counsel's appointment, and argued that presidential records belong personally to the president. These cases were framed not as criminal matters, but as constitutional crises requiring Supreme Court intervention. But the court's latest ruling shatters those expectations. It makes clear that even the conservative justices Trump appointed are unwilling to place former presidents above the law. This was not a narrow procedural decision. It was a sweeping rejection of Trump's core legal arguments. Even more damaging, the ruling was supported by justices Trump has counted on. This was not a partisan split driven solely by liberal members of the court. Instead, it was a decisive statement from the nation's highest court that Trump's legal theories lack merit and that his criminal cases can move forward without the constitutional barriers his team has tried to build. The Supreme Court is signaling something unmistakable. The rule of law takes priority over loyalty to any former president, even one who appointed members of the court. Constitutional principles are being applied neutrally, not reshaped to protect a powerful defendant, and the consequences of this decision extend far beyond Donald Trump himself. This ruling sets a lasting precedent on presidential accountability. It confirms that former presidents can be criminally prosecuted without special constitutional protections, a principle that will shape American law for generations. In this video, we'll break down what the Supreme Court decided, why Trump's reaction has been so intense, and what this means for the multiple criminal cases now moving toward trial without the legal shield he was counting on. Donald Trump is a former president and a current criminal defendant, facing 91 charges across 4 jurisdictions. Since these cases began, his legal strategy has focused on one primary goal: delay. Trump has filed repeated motions to dismiss charges, limit evidence, and challenge prosecutors' authority, all aimed at pushing trials past the 2024 election. His hope is clear: win the presidency and regain control of the Justice Department to eliminate the federal cases. At the center of this strategy is Trump's claim of presidential immunity. His lawyers argue that former presidents cannot be prosecuted for actions taken while in office, claiming that criminal accountability would weaken the presidency and violate separation of powers. They assert that impeachment, not prosecution, is the proper remedy for presidential misconduct. Legal experts have rejected these arguments from the start. The Constitution does not grant presidents immunity from criminal law, and American history offers no example of absolute executive immunity. The nation's system of checks and balances was designed specifically to prevent any individual from being above the law. Despite repeated losses in district and appellate courts, Trump's team continued appealing, convinced the Supreme Court would intervene. The case decided today centered on Trump's claim that his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, including conduct tied to January 6th, were official presidential acts and therefore immune from prosecution. His attorneys argued that prosecution would open the door to politically motivated cases against future presidents and that his Senate acquittal barred criminal charges. Prosecutors countered forcefully, arguing that Trump's actions were not official duties but personal conduct aimed at retaining power after losing the election. They warned that accepting Trump's theory would allow presidents to commit crimes with impunity simply by labeling them official acts. Lower courts unanimously rejected Trump's immunity claims, but the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, creating further delay. During oral arguments, Trump's team believed the justices' questions suggested a possible partial win. That expectation proved wrong. Instead, the Supreme Court issued a sweeping rejection of Trump's immunity arguments. The ruling makes clear that former presidents can be criminally prosecuted for illegal conduct, even when it occurs during their time in office. The presidency does not place anyone above the law, and criminal accountability is essential to democracy. The court drew a sharp distinction between legitimate official acts and personal criminal behavior, stating clearly that Trump's efforts to overturn the election fall into the latter category. Even more damaging to Trump's narrative, the decision was not narrowly divided. Chief Justice John Roberts authored the majority opinion, joined by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh, demonstrating broad agreement across ideological lines. This means that two of the three justices Donald Trump personally appointed to the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, voted against him on this critical issue. Only Justices Thomas and Alito dissented, arguing for a broader theory of presidential immunity. Justice Amy Coney Barrett agreed with the outcome but wrote a separate concurrence, outlining a slightly different legal approach. The fact that Trump lost the support of justices he appointed and openly expected to protect him makes this defeat especially humiliating and politically damaging. He cannot credibly claim this was a partisan ruling by liberal justices, nor can he argue that his own appointees were compromised. The conservative jurists he selected specifically for their views on executive power concluded that his immunity arguments lack merit and that his prosecution should move forward. This ruling also exposes the fundamental dishonesty behind Trump's persecution narrative. For months, he has claimed the criminal cases against him are unconstitutional, politically motivated witch hunts designed to destroy him. He has portrayed himself as a victim targeted by a corrupt system afraid of his political influence. But when a Supreme Court dominated by conservatives, including justices he appointed, rejects those claims, that narrative collapses. The nation's highest court has effectively confirmed that Trump's prosecutions are constitutionally sound and that he must face trial like any other defendant. This is not political persecution. This is the legal system operating exactly as it was designed, to hold powerful individuals accountable when credible criminal charges are brought. Reports from around 10 p.m. Eastern Time revealed just how stunned Trump and his legal team were by the ruling. The decision was released without advance notice as part of the court's routine decision day. Trump's attorneys had believed that if they lost, the ruling would be narrow and delayed until later in the term, possibly June, giving them more time to stall upcoming trials. Instead, the decision arrived months earlier than expected, rejected Trump's immunity claims broadly, and immediately cleared the way for trial courts to resume proceedings that had been paused. Within 15 minutes of the ruling's release, Trump began posting on Truth Social. His first message read, "Supreme Court has made a terrible mistake. Our country is going down." That post was quickly followed by a barrage of increasingly furious attacks on the court, the justices, and the legal system itself. Trump labeled the decision a disgrace and accused the justices who ruled against him of being weak and afraid of the radical left mob. It was an extraordinary public attack on the Supreme Court by a man who appointed a third of its members. Trump's reaction reveals both his anger and his disbelief that the court did not protect him as he expected. In his view, any legal outcome that goes against him is not the result of neutral law, but evidence of corruption, cowardice, or conspiracy, and this was not a private outburst. Trump chose to publicly attack one of the most respected constitutional institutions in the country. The backlash sent shockwaves through legal and political circles. It raises serious questions about Trump's respect for the rule of law and constitutional governance. If he cannot accept Supreme Court rulings that go against him, what does that say about how he would behave if re-elected? What happens to democratic stability when a leading presidential candidate openly attacks the legitimacy of the Supreme Court? Legal analysts are now asking a blunt but powerful question. If Trump's own Supreme Court appointees reject his immunity claims, how can he continue to argue that his prosecutions are unconstitutional or politically motivated? Increasingly, the answer appears to be that he cannot, leaving him with far fewer legal and political defenses as his trials move forward. This is not new behavior. Trump has a long history of attacking judges who rule against him. Judicial independence, in his view, seems to depend entirely on whether a decision benefits him personally. Judges he likes are praised as fair and brilliant. Judges who rule against him are immediately accused of bias, incompetence, or corruption. We saw this pattern in 2016 with Judge Gonzalo Curiel in the Trump University fraud case, when Trump falsely claimed the judge could not be fair because of his heritage. We've seen it again with Judge Arthur Engoron in New York, presiding over Trump's civil fraud case, where Trump's attacks became so extreme that security concerns and a gag order followed. The same pattern continues with Judge Tanya Chutkan in Trump's federal January 6 case, whom Trump routinely labels biased and politically motivated simply for applying standard legal principles. Even judges who have ruled partly in Trump's favor, such as Judge Eileen Cannon in the classified documents case, have faced criticism when they did not give him everything he demanded. Now, Trump is extending this pattern to the Supreme Court itself, an escalation that threatens the legitimacy of the entire federal judiciary. Historically, presidents have respected Supreme Court decisions even when they disagreed with them, recognizing that public confidence in the court is essential to the rule of law. Disagreeing with court rulings is legitimate. Undermining the judiciary's legitimacy is not. Courts rely on public trust and voluntary compliance, not force. When political leaders encourage their supporters to view the judiciary as corrupt or illegitimate, they risk destabilizing the entire constitutional system. Trump's attacks on the Supreme Court are especially dangerous because they come from someone who may hold the presidency again, and who would have immense power to weaken the very institutions designed to limit executive abuse. So what exactly did the Supreme Court decide that triggered such intense outrage from Donald Trump? At its core, the ruling delivered a clear and definitive rejection of Trump's claim that former presidents are immune from criminal prosecution. The court held that the Constitution does not grant former presidents immunity from criminal charges after they leave office. Presidents can be held criminally accountable for illegal actions taken while in office if those actions were not part of their legitimate constitutional duties. Simply serving as president does not place anyone above the law or exempt them from the criminal justice system. The decision does acknowledge that presidents have limited immunity for certain official acts while in office, designed to prevent harassment over legitimate exercises of presidential authority. However, the court made clear that this immunity is narrow and does not extend to personal criminal conduct, even if that conduct occurred during a presidency. The opinion systematically dismantles each of Trump's immunity arguments. Trump claimed that prosecuting former presidents would invite political retaliation. The court rejected this, noting that criminal cases require indictment by a grand jury and conviction by a trial jury, creating strong safeguards against politically motivated prosecutions. Prosecutorial discretion and Justice Department policies provide additional protections. Trump also argued that impeachment is the exclusive remedy for presidential misconduct, and that criminal prosecution after impeachment violates double jeopardy. The court rejected this outright, explaining that impeachment is a political process aimed at removal from office, while criminal prosecution is a legal process designed to punish violations of law. They are separate proceedings with different purposes, and pursuing both raises no constitutional conflict. Trump further claimed that immunity is necessary so presidents can act decisively without fear of future prosecution. The court acknowledged the concern, but emphasized that presidents can act forcefully while remaining within the law. Accountability for illegal conduct is not a threat to democracy, it is a requirement of it. Allowing presidents to commit crimes without consequence would fundamentally undermine the principle that no one is above the law. The decision also includes a direct analysis of Trump's conduct surrounding January 6. The court concluded decisively that Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election were not official presidential acts. Presidents have no constitutional role in reversing election outcomes. Trump's actions were aimed at benefiting himself personally, involved private actors and state officials, and fell completely outside the scope of legitimate executive authority. This conclusion is devastating for Trump's broader legal strategy. If attempting to overturn an election is not protected conduct, then retaining classified documents, falsifying business records, or paying hush money clearly receive no immunity either. The ruling provides a clear framework for trial courts to reject Trump's immunity claims across all of his criminal cases. When Trump and his legal team grasped the full implications of the ruling, their reaction was explosive. In Trump's worldview, the Supreme Court has betrayed him. Any decision allowing his prosecutions to move forward is by definition illegitimate. Even justices he appointed are viewed as weak or disloyal for failing to protect him. This leaves Trump in a catastrophic legal position. His entire strategy depended on delay and the hope that the Supreme Court would eventually block or cripple the prosecutions. With that strategy now destroyed, Trump faces 4 criminal trials with strong evidence and fewer avenues to stall proceedings. Those trials will expose evidence, documents, and witness testimony in full public view during an election year while Trump is campaigning for president. Juries, not political allies, will assess that evidence and potentially convict him on multiple felony charges. Trump is now trapped. He can accept the court's ruling and face trials that threaten his political future, making his claims of persecution increasingly difficult to sustain. Or he can continue attacking the Supreme Court and the justice system, encouraging his supporters to reject judicial authority and risking a broader crisis of legitimacy if verdicts go against him. That is the danger of this moment. Trump has spent years telling his supporters that any institution holding him accountable is corrupt. He cannot abandon that narrative now without undermining his own credibility. But continuing it means attacking the legitimacy of the Supreme Court itself. Legal scholars and defenders of democratic institutions are deeply alarmed. If large numbers of Americans are persuaded that Supreme Court rulings can be ignored when politically inconvenient, the constitutional system begins to collapse. Courts rely on public trust and voluntary compliance, not force. That is why experts are warning that Trump's attacks on the Supreme Court are not just about his legal troubles, they represent a serious and growing threat to judicial independence and the rule of law itself. Legal experts have been watching this pattern unfold for years. They've seen Trump attack trial judges, appellate judges, and now even Supreme Court justices. They've watched his supporters increasingly embrace the belief that any legal ruling against Trump is proof of corruption rather than a neutral application of the law. And many are deeply concerned about what happens if Trump is convicted and continues telling his supporters that the verdicts are illegitimate. At the same time, Trump's remaining defenders in legal and political circles are struggling to justify his attacks on the Supreme Court. Some argue that Trump is simply frustrated and that concerns about political prosecution are valid even if the court disagrees. But that argument becomes far harder to sustain when conservative justices Trump personally appointed are voting against him. It is increasingly difficult to claim these prosecutions are unconstitutional when the Supreme Court has ruled clearly that they are not. That difficulty deepened when prominent conservative legal scholars, many of whom have generally supported Trump, began publicly acknowledging that his immunity arguments were weak from the start. These scholars are now distancing themselves from Trump's more extreme legal claims while trying to maintain their conservative credibility. Their candor further undermines Trump's narrative and makes it harder for him to argue that serious legal minds support his position. The fact that Chief Justice John Roberts authored the opinion is especially significant. Roberts is widely viewed as an institutionalist who cares deeply about the court's legitimacy and public standing. Throughout his tenure, he has sought consensus and avoided the appearance that the court is merely another political body. His decision to write this opinion himself and to craft language that attracted support from both conservative and liberal justices signals how important this case was to the court as an institution. The opinion is thorough, deliberate, and carefully reasoned. It walks through Trump's arguments one by one, examining constitutional text, historical practice, and precedent before rejecting them. It acknowledges the legitimate need to protect presidential decision-making, but explains why those concerns do not justify absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. The depth of the analysis makes it extremely difficult to dismiss the ruling as rushed or politically motivated. Roberts also includes language clearly aimed at Trump and his supporters, emphasizing that the rule of law depends on accepting judicial decisions even when you disagree with them. He notes that throughout American history, political leaders have respected Supreme Court authority, even when rulings limited their power or went against their interests. This serves as an implicit rebuke of Trump's attacks and a direct defense of judicial independence. Justice Amy Coney Barrett's concurrence is also notable. Barrett, one of Trump's appointees, wrote separately to explain her reasoning while agreeing with the outcome. She emphasized that judges must apply the law neutrally, without regard to political consequences or personal loyalty. She explicitly rejected the idea that she owed Trump any special consideration because he appointed her. This is judicial independence in action, and precisely what Trump finds intolerable. The dissents by Justices Thomas and Alito argued for a broader view of presidential immunity, but even they did not endorse the absolute immunity Trump was seeking. Their opinions focused on narrower questions about how to evaluate official acts. Notably, even the justices most sympathetic to Trump acknowledged that some presidential conduct can be prosecuted criminally. Trump secured only 2 votes out of 9, an unmistakable sign of how isolated and weak his legal position truly is. So, what does this decision mean in practical terms? First and most immediately, it removes the primary legal obstacle delaying Trump's trials. Judges who were waiting for Supreme Court guidance can now move forward. Trial dates will be set or reset quickly. The federal January 6th case in Washington could begin within weeks. The classified documents case in Florida will also move ahead, though that court has previously allowed delays. State cases in Georgia and New York will continue, now informed by the Supreme Court's clear rejection of immunity claims. The result is unavoidable. Trump is likely to face 1 or more criminal trials before the November election. That means voters will see evidence presented in open court, documents, witnesses, sworn testimony examined in real time. These proceedings will dominate news coverage and strip away Trump's ability to control the narrative. Allegations he once dismissed as persecution will become concrete evidence evaluated by juries. This is Trump's nightmare scenario. Trials eliminate the ability to simply lie about what evidence exists. Jurors, not political allies, will decide the facts. The political consequences could be devastating. While Trump's base is unlikely to abandon him, polling consistently shows that swing voters and Republican-leaning independents are far less willing to support a candidate convicted of felonies. A conviction, even in a single case, would make Trump a convicted felon running for president, an unprecedented situation in American history. Democrats are already preparing to highlight that even Trump's own Supreme Court appointees rejected his immunity claims. They will argue that these prosecutions are legitimate, not partisan witch hunts, and will use trial evidence and verdicts as central campaign themes, particularly targeting voters who value rule of law and institutional stability. Even if Trump somehow wins the presidency, this ruling will constrain him. The Supreme Court has made clear that presidents are not above the law and can face prosecution for illegal conduct. In theory, this should deter abuse of power. In practice, Trump's reaction suggests otherwise. Rather than accepting accountability, Trump appears more radicalized. His fury toward the Supreme Court and refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing suggest he sees the legal system as illegitimate. If anything, this mindset increases the risk that he would govern recklessly, believing he has nothing to lose. That is the broader danger. This moment tests whether American democracy can hold powerful individuals accountable when they command intense political loyalty. Trump's strategy has always been to convert political support into immunity by labeling all accountability as persecution. That strategy fails when courts, including the Supreme Court, refuse to play along. The court's decision represents the legal system pushing back, affirming that political power does not place anyone above the law. The coming months will be critical. Trump will be running for president while defending himself in criminal trials. Prosecutors will present evidence while he claims persecution. Judges and juries will issue rulings that test whether rule of law still holds. This is not just about Donald Trump. It is about whether American democracy can survive extreme polarization and enforce accountability even against the most powerful figures. The stakes, for the legal system, the election, and the future of constitutional governance could not be higher. Trump's legal walls are collapsing. His Supreme Court strategy has failed. The path to accountability is now open. What happens next will help determine whether the United States remains a nation governed by laws, or one where power and loyalty outweigh justice.